This is Andrew with Front Range CNC. Today we're going to talk about dust collection. So dust collection is one of those things that's really important, especially on a 4x8 or 5x10, even 5x12 CNC. It's more important than just the obvious dust in the room and the health disadvantages to that. But the reason why it's really helpful is because a lot of times you are cutting one sheet so that you can move on and get the second sheet on. And the more dust that you've got left on the table or on your spoil board will directly translate into more time it takes for you to get the next sheet loaded and start cutting. There's a lot of factors that will come into play in terms of how well your dust is done. The biggest one will be the size of the inlet port coming into the CNC. Most large industrial machines will use a minimum a 6-inch inlet port. You'll even see European machines use an 8-inch in some places. Some of the smaller machines will use a 4-inch. And as long as you've got enough CFM on your dust collector, a 6-inch and up really is going to be the way to go. It'll be more suction over a wider area. You'll get more dust up. The other thing to consider, on most industrial machines, there's some form of mechanism that's raising and lowering your dust hood. So we've got two options at Front Range. One is an air cylinder that will lower your dust hood, and another is actually a motor that will lower your dust hood to the height of the router bit that is in your table. So basically, you'll measure all of your tooling just like you would, and then depending on the height of that exact tool, the motor will actually lower the dust hood to cover as much as possible. So a longer tool will go lower, and a shorter tool it will choke up and come higher. The other option is the air solenoid kind of setup, and that is simply going to raise and lower the dust hood. But ideally, you want your dust port to be in front of your spindle rather than to a side if you can avoid it, simply because then as you're moving left to right or right to left, it's not going to make a large difference in terms of where the bulk of that suction is coming from. There's different ways you see dust hoods done. If it is air actuated, then it doesn't add any time for a tool change because the machine just goes to the next tool, dust hood comes up, gets the tool, and now it comes back down and you keep cutting, as well as with the motor. There are some setups where the machine's got to essentially put a dust hood somewhere else. It leaves it there, then it gets the tool, then it comes back to get the dust hood, and it does add more unnecessary time. But sometimes it just depends on how the manufacturer has set that actual routine of getting the next tool that will dictate what options there are for their dust setup. On the Front Range machine, we've also got essentially a push-off arm at the front, but on that actual beam itself is cutouts underneath, and those are sucking as well. And so, between the dust hood coming down and sucking with the 6-inch port at that height, and then added on to that the ability for the machine to really clean the table on its own, it helps to diminish a lot of operator manual labor that you would need to do. And depending on what you're cutting, especially if it's a plywood or even an MDF, even a melamine, this can add up quite a bit, because a flow you can imagine is that you cut a sheet, there's a minimal amount of dust left in the cavities, so you can either manually take those parts off. If you don't have an unload table, that's fine, and you can then stack them. And now your spoil board has got some remnants of dust of where you cut. And so now you can simply have the machine clean that table for you and then put the next sheet on. And so the machine will clean, you'll put your pop-up pins up, and then you just put the next sheet on and choose the next one. And so that's a really, really nice feature. But it is something that is important to keep in mind. You don't need a dedicated dust collector just for the CNC. You can tie it in with your existing setup as long as you've got a large enough dust collector with enough CFM. But there are different options of how you could do that. If you do have more questions about dust collection, maybe even just how you can improve your existing setup, or if you've got more questions on how we do things, feel free to send us an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to talk to you about the different considerations, even if you're just shopping for a dust collector that you want to add to a setup, or maybe you want to get a dust collector now and a CNC later. We'd be happy to give you some advice as to what to consider as you're starting to run your shop and get that all set up. All right, thanks so much.